Today it is a real pleasure to welcome Leo Bottary back to the show. Leo, you are the founder of Peer Innovation and a leading voice on how peer learning can transform not just leadership but entire teams. Your new book, the second edition of Peer Innovation, explores how the powerful dynamics of CEO peer groups can be brought into everyday teams to help them connect, grow together, and perform with greater purpose. You are passionate about helping people and organizations unlock the power of collaboration and build more connected, high performance teams or high performing teams. Leo, it's great to have you back. Welcome back. It's been 4 years. Can you believe it?
It's great to be here. Great to hear your voice. I thought that I should have had you read the audiobook. Just beautifully done, as always. And great to be here. Like I said, no one says my last name quite like you do, so it's always nice to. It's been a while
Oh,
since I've been on the show, but really excited to be here.
thank you. Yeah, you're too kind about my voice. I know it's very, let's say, unique. I will leave it to that. To that. It's great to have you back. And I was looking earlier, and we first spoke in episode 128. So
Wow.
now that we're speaking, we're past 500. So it's been, 4 years. Lots have changed for
My hair is
you.
whiter now. All of
Tell me
that.
about
So.
it. My beard is whiter as well. Yes, I don't have much hair, but I think there is white there also. uh, what I would like to start, because we will talk about the power of peer learning and all the things that you brought again into the surface with your the second edition of your book. I would like to start and also, perhaps connect us in a way to that episode 4 years ago. One of the standout ideas that you had shared at that time was how accountability in a team is about personal responsibility
Hmm.
rather than top down pressure. So I want to ask you, since then, how has your thinking around that evolved? Has the meaning of personal responsibility changed for you in the last few years?
No, not really. I do think it's about people accepting personal responsibility for bringing their best. It doesn't have to be top down, but I think there's a real peer to peer element to it as well.
Hmm.
I've been on teams, for example. I always tell a story when I first was working at Mullen, and today it's Mullen Low. And I went to a meeting that was looking at how we were going to approach this new prospect. And the people in that meeting were unbelievably well prepared. I mean,
Mm.
they knew the details about not only the client and the competitors and the history of the advertising and the psychographics of the market and what was going to happen in the economy in that sector over the next several years and all of that. And I came prepared to that meeting. However, it was kind of a welcome to the NFL moment for me, if you will, when I was like, wow, I was prepared, but I wasn't Mullen Lowe prepared.
Mhm.
And so what I realized was that if I'm going to play in this league, I have to up my game. I didn't need a boss to tell me that. I didn't need anything, but those peers set the example for me about what being prepared in this environment is all about. And they are dead serious and remain so today about creating the best advertising in the world. And to do that,
Mhm.
you've got to be ready. And so that was an extraordinary lesson. I think the same holds true for when I was in graduate school. Same holds true for when I've been on teams or groups or things like that, where everyone really has the capacity to lift each other up. And if people accept personal responsibility for that, if people believe that the power of we begins with me and the example I set, and we have clarity about what we expect of ourselves and others, and that makes a big difference. And so, I would very much say, and of course, yeah, out of that book that you're talking about too, I think the idea was that successful people tend to ask for help, right?
Mm.
And we talked
Mhm.
about this prior to getting on the air. Um, they don't see asking for help as a sign of weakness. They regard it as an act of resourcefulness. And because of that, it puts them in a position, I think, to be well equipped to access the resources around them and meet the challenges that are ahead. And again, it doesn't matter if you're in a large corporation, a small company, among a group of friends, among all the challenges that life puts in front of us, we are much
Mhm.
better together.
That's great. Let me start with what you just said about asking for help not being a weakness as many see it, but actually resourcefulness, which is a great reframing for many people. For someone who is listening right now, might be a bit not seeing it like that and being hesitant to ask for help. What would you say? How can one shift that lens and look more of asking for help as resourcefulness? As you said, I love that word.
This is such a big issue that I literally have a webinar dedicated strictly on that subject.
Hmm.
And it begins by asking people, how does asking for help make you feel? And I'll use Mentimeter and we'll create a word cloud instantly with the folks on the line. And it will be, I'll get words like helpless and stupid and inadequate and all of these things. Most of the things that people respond with are really negative.
Uh-huh.
They believe that asking for the help is, again, puts them in a feeling that they're incompetent and they're not up to what they need to, or that they think about it in terms of needing someone's help versus inviting someone's help. And I think there's some shifts there that can be made with regard to all of those things. um, and that's part of the journey I try to take them on in that uh, webinar, is to go
Hmm.
from seeing it as that sign of weakness to regarding it as something that successful people do. We when we turn on our television or look online or watch any kind of a program, and everything's personified, right? Everything's simplified. Everything is about this person accomplished this. Well, this person may have been the leader and may have done some great things, but
Hmm.
great things are accomplished by collectives. Great. There's a lot of people involved. That person would be nowhere without their team. So, and those team members who come together bring different gifts to the table.
Hmm.
And so, if you are not getting to know these people well, understand their gifts, figure out how you can really help one another, right? That's really what it's all about. And when you kind of see it that way, it's almost like the the old story that used to people used to always make fun of men, because they would go into some town that they've never been to and they didn't want to ask for directions, right? Because they felt like, okay,
I think
and
I've
and
done
yet,
that.
but these people live here. Why in the world wouldn't you say, hey, where's X street, where's X address, where's this company? So I'm
Of
going to
course.
ride around all over the place looking for stuff, probably endangering pedestrians and other people as I'm not paying attention to what's happening on the road. So I think it's just practical, to just say, you know, and again, I think there's something to be said for how we ask for that help.
Hmm.
So I typically will mention to people, don't necessarily express it as I need your help, which kind of puts you in that position. But I invite your help. I want your help. This will be better with your input. It's not that I can't do it, it's that it'll be better if you're involved, in some way. And while on one hand we think that, and there's a lot of things that go through our minds. Now, if we've asked someone help, now we owe them, or if we ask somebody for help, we lose control, all kinds of things like that. But I
Hmm.
think the reality is that if you're concerned about the outcome, if you're concerned about what ever it is you're trying to do, and try to make it better, I think seeking the help and assistance of others is a really good idea. And if you send that as an invitation, and by the way, it makes you feel good, right? If I call you and I say, Ajay, I would love to have your help with this, that kind of says, wow, he thinks a lot of me, that I can contribute to making whatever he's
Hmm.
trying to do better. And I think that's a nice thing. And I think the more that we can treat one another that way, and work together in that way, I think the better.
Thank you. And I really liked this differentiation, which you repeated a few times, between needing help and inviting help, because it really, I think you gave me exactly the kind of answer I was looking for in terms of shifting a lens, because that is a lens looking at us need or invite. It makes a huge difference. Uh, you earlier on, and I'll come back to that also, you were saying about the peers that you said that you had prepared, but not to that level for that
Hmm.
environment. And our peers definitely will regulate our standards.
You bet.
Whatever people are around us, generally, and in the work and at home, everywhere, will
Yeah. We can be what we tolerate, So exactly.
exactly. Um, One other thing, Leo, you mentioned it earlier, very briefly, but I wanted to ask you because it is a core theme in your book, and it is that the move from me to we, which you said earlier. So I want to ask, in practical terms, give us an example or some principle of how that is applied.
So one of the stories I tell in the book is the fact that, and I describe it as my journey, my personal journey from me to we. So I graduated college in 1983. I didn't go back to graduate school until 2006. Now, when I was in college, education was kind of a solo pursuit, right? I'd sit there and I'd take notes and the professor would talk and I'd, write papers and take quizzes and exams and all that. You're shielding your paper from other people. It was very much that kind of environment.
Yeah.
So next thing you know, fast forward to 2006 and I'm part of a cohort. Now I'm part of this learning team where it's all set up for collaborative learning. Now, as collaborative learning would have been called cheating, basically 20 plus years earlier. And here I am now in this environment where we're supposed to help one another. And the reality is that in that environment, we learned most from one another. I worked with an incredible group of mid to senior level executives, amazing people. Second from the material, and third from the professors. And by the way, the professors wouldn't dispute that characterization at all. It's the very thing they were trying to set up. That was their intent and that was their belief. And they understand that we do learn better when we learn together.
Hmm.
And largely because of two reasons. A, we can help one another absorb that information better, right? We know based on collaborative learning theory that, if you and I, for example, were to read an 800 word blog post, we're going to remember, if you think about it in terms of the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, right? About 28% of it for about 24 to 48 hours. If we read it a second time, the number goes to 46%. Put a group together after having read that one time, and now all of a sudden we talk about it, we grapple with the concepts, we share ideas. Now the number goes to 69%.
Hmm.
It basically creates neural pathways for us that allow us to engage and retain information better. That's number one. The second piece is that usually how we engage one another provides us in a completely different set of lessons. And this is where we have kind of intentional learning, right? Taking in content by watching a video, hearing a speaker, or reading a book, or whatever it may happen to be. But then there's also collateral learning. And that comes from John Dewey in the 1930s, where he basically said, those lessons that we receive directly, those are really important. But you know what the real lessons are? What we learn from how we learn. So
Hmm.
how we engage one another teaches us things like, how do we be more present? How do we listen more carefully? How do we ask more precise questions? And I think best of all, what it teaches us, because every one of us has the tendency when we hear someone make a statement about something or do something, we do one of three things. We rush to judgment, we jump to conclusions, and we make assumptions about where this is all coming from. Okay. If you can actually take a breath, lean into your curiosity, ask questions, and listen for understanding as opposed to trying to be right,
Hmm.
that makes an enormous difference in terms of how we can see one another and how we can see the world. So I think that the impact of this type of learning, which I experienced in graduate school, and of course, quickly fast forward, I graduated in 2008. By 2010, I was working at Vistage, which assembles and facilitates peer advisory groups in 40 countries around the world for CEOs, business leaders, and all of that, and really got some real firsthand, experience there. And of course, since worked with, so many other organizations around the world who lead these groups. And
Hmm.
then you see how easily these basic principles that we've been talking about, which really in our discussion so far haven't been corporate specific. If you think about it, they're just general life stuff. How this applies, if we can bring this and be more intentional about bringing this to our teams, it makes all the difference in the world. And it is basic stuff. And people will say, well, this seems a lot like common sense. I'm like, well, it really is. I wish we all just did it more often. It's always interesting if you think about it. If you go, let's say you're watching a football game on TV, and I'm talking American football, I guess, is my example. But, at halftime, they'll interview the coach and they'll say, well, what do you need to do, to get back into this game in the second half? Well, it's typically not some grand strategy. We have to block. We have to tackle. We have to hold onto the football and don't turn it over. All of these basic things that it all comes down to, doing those things well, that is going to make a difference between you coming back in that football game or not. And I think that's very much the same in life.
Thank you. I agree very much that these principles are irrelevant of whether you are in a corporate environment or you are at home having a conversation with your children or your spouse, because the principles apply the same. And what you were saying earlier about not judging or responding out of
Right.
the need to prove you something rather than understanding, these are all qualities that are very much applicable always. I think taking a moment to listen what the other person say and having the awareness to process that before you give your response, I think it is, a skill. All these are skills for, I would say, personal development. I mean, since the podcast is personal development, it's, I think they are all, expanded and we can use them.
Yeah, we're not really taught, if you think about it, to listen for understanding. I mean, think about the fact that when I talk with most people and I ask them, did you grow up in a household where you were discouraged, let's say by your parents, to avoid conversations in social situations about politics and religion? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Everybody, every hand in the room will go up. Yes. So now when you think about that, we are now set up to be incapable of having those conversations because we believe it's going to be a pitched battle. We believe it's about who's right, who isn't, and all this other kind of stuff. Think about if we were taught at a much younger age to be able to have those conversations. Now, I get why parents do this. Basically, parents don't want their kind of nascent political or religious views to be under attack by other people and feel like their kid isn't necessarily equipped to have that conversation or whatever. And they, in some respects, are kind of productive in that way. Right or wrong, I think that's a lot of the reason for it. But unfortunately, it puts us in a position again where we are not wired now to be able to have those conversations in a way that is really about, hey, I just want to understand where your politics comes from. I want to understand the role faith plays in your life and what that means for you. It doesn't mean I have to agree with it. It doesn't mean any of those things. It just means I'm going to be curious, ask questions, and get an understanding and respect other people and where they come from. And I think if we could do a better job at that and start this process a lot younger, it might be helpful as well.
I think it is our duty to do this and every other thing in our power to be better people, to grow.
When I bring up this thing about little kids, my granddaughter, who's in the second grade, is in a classroom where the teacher, her name is Shanna Roll, does a thing every morning with the kids, and it's called Clearings and Celebration. And so they begin every day, does anyone have anything to clear? And the idea here would be, the kid might say, yeah, my dog is sick, or I cut myself yesterday and it's kind of bothering me, or something is kind of going on. And people listen to that student and they get to say, okay, just want to let you know this is going on. And the idea is that despite what I've got going on, as big or small as that may be, I am going to bring my best self today. But at least you know what's happening and what's going on with that person. Then with celebrations, it becomes, hey, I just finished a book, or it's my mom's birthday today, or something like that. And you get that lift, of everyone about what's going on in their life and why they may be, where they
Mhm.
are. But it's a real lesson in empathy, in meeting people where they are, in understanding and not making fun of other people. And, I mean, it sets an unbelievable tone, not just for that classroom, but I think it sets a foundation for those kids in life that is extraordinary, and I hope continues to be practiced as she moves in other grades. I'm not sure she isn't the only teacher in that school who does this, but I thought it was an extraordinary practice. I've heard about it before, but I
Mhm.
never heard it implemented in a second grade classroom quite the way she does it, and how incredibly effective it is. So, again, I think kids have a real capacity to be able to do so much, and have those conversations and really listen and care about one another. And, I think that's a really great lesson that she's bringing forward there.
Definitely. And what came to me when you were describing this game, I can because they're children, I suppose they can also they probably see it as a
Hmm.
game rather than you and I now look at it very seriously and analytically. But I think one other thing that it teaches and allows them is the fact that the environment is safe to express their learning, which might be some vulnerable moment, and also the
100%.
celebration, which sometimes you might wonder, is that really worth celebrating? So it builds this ability to, because when you are in a safe environment like this and you can express really what you want without being judged, I think that will make a huge difference, not only further down the line, but always, I think.
One of the things that's interesting what you say too is it speaks to the idea that we can not only feel vulnerable when we're sharing challenges that are happening in our lives, but I think just as much, maybe more so, trying to share our aspirations.
Hmm.
Because how vulnerable it is, right? Like if I shared an aspiration that I want to achieve this in my life, and someone's looking at me like, really? Like, I don't think that's going to happen. I
Yeah.
mean, how devastating that would be, right? So people tend to hold that stuff in. They don't want to put themselves out there that they're looking to do,
Yes.
because unfortunately, they feel that a reaction, not by everybody, but at least by some people, might not be, hey, how can we help you make that happen? It's, I don't know about that. Could be could be a high bar for you, so it's interesting, and I think we've got to try to be good at both. I think, and this is true in with CEO peer advisory groups. You go right up there, you talk about, hey, what are your aspirations for yourself or this company or for what you want to contribute to the world. That's a vulnerable place to go, um, but yet I think it's really important. And at the end of the day, we can't help one another if we don't know what help
Hmm.
we need. I couldn't be of assistance to you if I don't know what you're looking for, and vice versa. And I
Yeah.
think having line of sight and visibility about what we want out of life, becomes really important.
I have a very personal knowledge of or experience of what you were describing, because 10 years ago I was that person that would not share aspirations or problems because, fear of judgment and this and that. I have
Sure.
done quite a lot of, work on that to figure it out. But I have been there, I know that very well, and I know how liberating and how pretty much the phrase that comes to mind, it's the doors that open actually when you speak and you say what's on your mind. Because as you said, unless you say it, people don't know what is going, they can't help you, they can't share with you their whatever it is, unless unless you say it. So
I think liberating is a great word, and I think it can be
um,
cathartic for a lot of folks.
mm,
A lot of times when we talk about people bringing challenges or aspirations of whatever, even in the context of a CEO peer group, I would suggest to them that to take control of the situation in terms of being clear with people about what you're looking for.
Mhm.
It may be that you just want to be heard, that you just want them to listen to you for 10 or 15 minutes. There's something on your mind. And a lot of times people won't bring certain things to a group because they're kind of not ready to deal with it. They get so much going on in their life right now. They just don't have the bandwidth to feel like they could put themselves out there with a group of people and now
Yeah.
be expected to actually have to deal with it, right? So, but if you can actually give somebody the space and the grace just to talk out loud about something, you'd be amazed how often that person will come back a couple months later and say, "Remember that thing I brought up a few months ago? I'm actually ready to
Mhm.
tackle that now." Or secondly, they may just say they're not looking for advice, but they would love to know if anyone has any experiences that align with the challenge that they just described, or align with the goal that they're trying to achieve. And
Mhm.
people around the table, without overtly trying to make very direct connections, just say, "Hey, based on what I've heard, here's was my challenge, or and here's what I did, and here's what the result was." And now I kind of collect those things around the room, and I feel like, okay, here's what resonated with me, and maybe here's what I feel is right for me in
Mm.
my situation and what I want to do. And then third, maybe you would love all the advice anyone's willing to give you because you don't have a clue, and you're just like, hey, bring it. But at least you're inviting that now. You are giving them the stage to do that. And the only thing I do suggest for the advice givers, though, is don't give advice like most people give it, which is, you know what you should do? Or you know what I would do if I were you? It's like, you don't even own that. So, you're on your heels. It's a directive. It's not anything other than that. But just to imagine yourself as if you were passing out appetizers at a wedding reception. Everyone's
Mhm.
clustered together and they've got their
Mhm.
drinks, and someone goes by and there's a little tray, and they just kind of come near the group, and people, you take one, you don't take one, no harm, no foul, no big deal. And if you think about giving advice that way, it might be, something as easy as, Audrey, have you considered such and such? Or have you thought about X? Or, you just kind of float it out there. You're not directing anyone to do anything. You're just putting something out there and allowing them to actually take it and allowing them to think to themselves, I can take this and I can own this. And I think that, again, those kinds of things can help really open up a conversation if we're willing to be clear with people about, I just want to be heard. I would love your experiences. I'll take all the advice you got, whatever it happens to be. And again, as advice givers, I think be mindful to make sure that that lands in a way that the person can actually accept it and take it on as their own.
That's a big topic on its own, for sure. About you know, giving unsolicited. That's the word that came to my mind. Advice,
Right.
whereas, yeah,
Yeah,
uh,
don't do that. Be wait to be asked. I think the other thing too is we can get into conversations with people pretty frequently. Let's say someone calls you and they've got something going on in their life. Sometimes what can be people's tendency, and I've certainly done it many times, is
Mhm.
someone will be telling their story, talking about what they're going
Mhm.
through, and I might find an opening to say, you know what, I've been through something very similar. But what I've done in that moment is if I've just hijacked the conversation away from that person, which is not great. They just want to be heard. They don't want to share. They want to share their story. My attempt at empathy at that moment is not great. Instead, what we should be doing, because again, that becomes unsolicited, is using the fact, if I'm thinking, okay, I've been through this at some point in my life, I don't have to introduce that and hijack the conversation. What I should be doing is using that experience to ask better questions
Mhm.
and to help them continue with their story and help to keep it about them. At some point in time, it's very likely that that person will say, hey, Leo, has anything ever happened to you that's similar to what I'm describing? A matter of fact, it has. But now they've just given me the stage. I didn't hijack it from them. And so it's just simple things like that that allow for you to really kind of respect who's speaking and how to handle that conversation in a way that's truly beneficial for them and not self-indulgent, for you.
That's a very, thank you, a very useful, lesson in communication. I think we all know people like the one that you described that
It's well
hijack.
intended. I get it, but it's
Yes,
but it
yes,
it doesn't
yes. It
typically work
doesn't
well.
land or
No,
it.
no.
Yes, indeed. Um, Leo, there is something specific. I have a question. There is someone that comes to my mind. Let's say the person watching this conversation or listening this conversation, and they have done the courses, they have been to the retreats, the deep dives, the books, whatever, but still are on this seeking of deeper fulfillment or purpose. So my question to you is, how can specifically peer based learning move them towards that direction of you know taking meaningful action and living more purposefully? I hope my question makes sense.
It really does. In fact, it's very relevant to. I've been an adjunct professor at Rutgers for quite some time now. I was at Seton Hall prior to that, beginning in 2008. In 2015, I became an adjunct professor at Rutgers, and actually, with a few other professors, we each have different, you know, groups, if you will. But I teach this course on personal branding,
Hmm.
and part of it begins with a real self-reflection. Who am I? What do I care about? What gifts do I have? What difference can I make in the world? What
Hmm.
does that look like in a way that's unfettered, from all of the feelings of, vulnerability or things like that, and get them to identify those things and have some clarity about that for themselves, but put them in a peer group where they talk about that with one another, and you create
Hmm.
this safe space for them to be able to have those conversations and support one another in what they do. Um, it's amazing how that goes and how incredible people and how generous people are with one another when you can give them the opportunity to A, engage in the reflection, and B, share what they're coming up with. And then it comes down to, okay, now what do we want to do about it? And I
Hmm.
think it's particularly important for so many of the graduate students. Of course, they're all different ages, but let's face it, a majority of them aren't too far removed from having graduated college. Maybe they took a couple of years off to work, or maybe they went straight into graduate school or whatever. But either way, they're trying to apply for jobs in the workplace, and too many people see themselves as kind of victims in that process, right? They see this massive, you know, construct out there, and they're trying to figure out, hey, if someone could just give me a job, that'd be great. That's my hope. They don't think about it in terms of, what do I want to do? Where do I want to work? How do I want to apply my gifts? And truly kind of take a little more control, over that situation, and have the confidence to do that. But I think it begins with having a level of clarity, and I think it begins with practicing with others in terms of sharing what those aspirations are, what those goals are all about, and maybe what would be required for me to kind of shore up areas where I could have weaknesses and get better,
Hmm.
or areas where I can double down on my strengths. And so that exercise alone, I think, is really powerful. And you don't have to be in a graduate school class to do it. You could put a few of your friends together, and three or four people sitting around a table saying, "Hey, what do we want to be doing? Are we doing what we want with our lives right now?" And have a real conversation about that. And so I think, again, we get back to words like liberating and empowering and unifying, right? When you get into these kinds of things. And
Hmm.
so I think, for anyone listening out there, it does begin, this journey from me to we starts with you. It starts with, I think when we talked before too, we were drawing a little bit from the book, What Anyone Can Do. And one of the concepts in there was, self-help doesn't mean buy your self-help. Right. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, we have to work on us first. It is a little bit like the airplane when they tell you to put the oxygen mask on yourself before trying to help others, because if you're
Yes.
not 100%, you're not going to be very useful to the people around you. I think it's a very similar situation here. You know, engage in that reflection, be thinking about what I can do, share that with others, be of service to others, be
Hmm.
generous with others in terms of helping them, achieve their aspirations or meet some of their challenges. And again, this is where we are so much better together, because left to our own devices, um, I think it's a big, complex world out there. And I think, we can use. We're back to the word help. We can use all the help we can get. So let's 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 recognize that.
I will, highlight once more something you said earlier about inviting help
Mm.
versus needing help. I think that struck a chord there, Leo. Um, where would you like to direct the listener of the conversation to find out more about your book and what you do also?
Sure. You can go to peerinnovation.biz, which is the website. And of course, any information about the books, about what peer innovation is about, how it may be relevant to you or your business or whatever that may look like in any way, certainly there. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Always love to connect with people on LinkedIn. And of course, the book is available on Amazon and anywhere books are sold. And I do feel like this second edition book, particularly the ebook, $3.99, fairly low investment, I think, in terms of at
Mhm.
least accessing the content and thinking about what can I apply in my life, what can I bring to others, and what does that look like. So, yeah, I invite people to do any of those things or all of the above.
Thank you very much. And, I was just thinking right now that it is these 4 years that have passed since our previous conversation. First of all, they don't feel like that, but the point I wanted to make was was how nice it is when for me in this position when I have a conversation again with someone after such a long time, which means that the message was powerful. And, having this conversation now, because we are both quite different after these 4 years
I
and
agree.
with more gray hair, as we were saying earlier. So it is fantastic to have that and see the difference and the involvement and have again this conversation. So having said that, that was probably a very complicated way to say thank you very much. I appreciate you for being here and having this conversation with me, Leo, and
Well,
the wisdom that you shared. Uh, I will leave it to you for your parting words. I don't know if you want to
just
share
that
anything.
I just appreciate you having me. This was, I think, a wonderful conversation. It'd be kind of interesting, actually, to listen back to the conversation we had back 4 years ago. And my guess is that both of us would be happier with this conversation than the one we had back then. And I bet that's true. So yeah, so it makes me kind of want to have a look at that. But it was, I'm just delighted to be here and appreciate our time together. So thank you so much.
uh, Leo, I would like to finish with your parting wisdom to the listener, someone who has listened to us for over half an hour now. What would you tell to him or her?
I think when we get up every day, it would be nice to have clarity about what do I expect of myself in terms of how I deal with others, and how can I be intentional about that, about whatever that means for me. Because having some level of intentionality and keeping the values and behaviors that we hold dear to the forefront and making sure we're living those each and every day, I think becomes essential, because otherwise it becomes too easy to have those things go in the background. We are exposed to so much content and so many things that it's just easy to move from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. And I think in many respects, we have to be thinking about how are we intentional about what we want from ourselves and the impact we have on others.
Thank you.